Good afternoon, everyone. It's 12:01, so it's a nice afternoon. Thanks for blowing in here. At least it's not as bad as it was yesterday. At least it should be ending right at noon, it says, according to the charts. So thank you for coming to our brown bag. This is our makeup session from our severe winter storm we had a couple weeks ago. And then we'll have another brown bag event next Wednesday. And that's Lena Homburger's presentation. And I'm not even sure what it's called.
Title IX.
Women's sports before Title IX.
Yeah.
Women's sports before Title IX. Today's presentation is Frederick Lewis, Kearney's forgotten lacrosse champion. And before we get started with this presentation, we want to just thank everybody who's involved in pulling these brown bags together. So I'm Linda Van Ingen, I'm chair of the History Department, and the History Department's one of the sponsors of this event, and so is the Kearney Public Library. And we always really, really appreciate the Kearney Public Library.
Us too. I mean,
so, yeah.
We're so appreciative of this partnership.
Yeah, it's a good partnership and worth reminding everybody that these partnerships exist because we want them to, and we make them happen, so thank you.
Sure.
So our presentation today, as I said, is Nathan, it's Kearney's forgotten lacrosse champion, and our speaker is Dr. Nathan Ty, who's a colleague of ours in the History Department. His area of specialty is Nebraska history and state and local history in the region, Great Plains region, and a lot of other things, as you've probably seen him present before. So let's introduce and welcome Dr. Ty.
Well, thank you everybody for coming for our makeup session. I'm really excited to kind of talk to you about Albert Frederick Lewis, who's someone who Kearney has unjustly forgotten. And this is a story that, like a lot of great local history stories, starts with a tip from somebody about what you need to look at. And so I really want to thank Brock Anderson, who couldn't be with us today, Elaine Battenhorst, who is down in Florida and enjoying much better weather, and the rest of the staff at the Trails and Rails Museum, Buffalo County Historical Society, where all of this started. And I also want to thank Lorinda Wisey, the University Archivist, who actually we've been able to acquire some items related to this story so that others can kind of learn about Albert Frederick Lewis in the collections at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. We have a lot of expected histories for Nebraska, right? We're a football state. We expect to find football players. We're a volleyball state, increasingly. We expect to find volleyball history. We have some very famous baseball players, Grover Cleveland Alexander, Bob Gibson, Java Chamberlain, who we expect to find baseball history, right? We don't expect to find lacrosse. That is not a Nebraska sport. There's club teams in Omaha, certainly, and youth teams and high school teams and university teams at Creighton University, but this is not what we expect to find. And so no one bothered to look because we didn't expect to find it. Why look for something we don't know existed? And so this all started with a tip. Brock Anderson got an email from a little museum in Cornwall, Ontario, which is a community I'm going to introduce you to. And they asked if we had anything on Albert Frederick Lewis. And we're like, who are you talking about? What are you talking about? And he's like, he's this famous Canadian lacrosse player. And we're like, okay. What? He's in your cemetery. Oh, okay. That was, okay, maybe we should know who he is. And so Brock and I, getting this email, immediately then went into the back of the museum and we're like, we don't have anything on lacrosse. Where are we going to find this guy, right? And we start kind of shifting through some things, and as I'll show you later, we actually have his naturalization documents when he becomes a U.S. citizen as part of this story. And so we inadvertently, this story is already documented. And as you're going to see, as I kind of walk you through this, this was actually a fairly easy story to put together because he's all over the Kearney Hub. He's all over the Kearney Press. Everybody in town knows Albert. And so this is a story that is of its time really well documented. But then, as I'll talk about, there's some reasons why people stop talking about Albert. But before we get there, I want to introduce you to lacrosse. Again, we are not a big lacrosse community. And lacrosse is the oldest sport in North America. It has its roots in indigenous stick and ball games, largely in the Ohio River Valley, in New England, and in Ontario, Quebec, these parts of Canada, and then down into the Mississippi region. And it's really popular to this day among a great many indigenous communities. The Choctaw, for example, continue to play and have international competitions of their version of lacrosse in Oklahoma. And it becomes really popular in Canada in the 1800s. That it becomes a gentleman's sport, kind of an early adoption that young men see this as a form of fitness. They see it as a form of kind of moral uplift, and becomes really popular among kind of college-age young men in Canada. They formalize it, they begin forming leagues, and they begin to play. And it is so popular, it is actually the official sport of Canada. When we think of Canada, we probably think of hockey, okay? But this is, by order of Parliament, the national sport of Canada. Very, very popular at the college level, professional level, and in the United States is also popular, but largely on the East Coast, at the elite universities and in kind of the locales that mimic its historic indigenous geography, as we're gonna see. And now it is a sport that is played across the world. Internationally, there's international leagues, competitions and things. So it has a really long and global history. And this is an early depiction of, this is a Choctaw ball and stick competition. This is painted by George Catlin. So some of us are probably familiar with George Catlin as the American-born painter. He's an attorney who teaches himself to paint, and he travels in the Midwest and the Ohio River regions in the 1830s. And we have a lot of his material at the Museum of Nebraska Art. Not this specific piece, but he actually watches and writes about, in his writings about his experiences, writes about attending these competitions and these games. But I want to shift our geography a little bit and look at Cornwall, which is a town that none of you have probably ever heard of in northern Ontario. See, right here, okay, just on the tip of, at the very top of New York. And this is a community along the St. Lawrence River. It's also next to a Native American reserve, the Iroquois St. Regis Indian Reserve 59. And this is a community that was actually founded shortly after the American Revolution. And it was created by loyalists, those British subjects living in what was to become the United States, who did not want to become Americans. They wanted to remain British. So they went over the river and established a community, a very vibrant but small loyalist community, which the town still celebrates today. They have a loyalist cemetery at the local Anglican parish. And it is its position on the river, its proximity to forests and other kinds of things make it an important timber hub, as well as an important textile hub. But because of its proximity to the Iroquois Reserve, it also very quickly becomes a lacrosse hub. Cornwall today will tell you that this is where professional lacrosse in North America was created. And this is a much debated subject, as we're going to see. But its proximity to the United States, again, it's right over the St. Lawrence River, also makes it an important site for another type of migration. And that is African Americans fleeing enslavement in the United States. And that's where we begin the story of Albert Frederick Lewis. His father, John Washington Lewis, was a local barber in Cornwall. He was born in 1822 in Georgia. He's also African American. What we know from what Albert kind of writes later in life and talking about his father is that his father had been enslaved in the South and at some point fled north into Canada, presumably along the Underground Railroad. The earliest census for Canada, the first official census for Canada, the national census, is 1871, which is right here. We see John Washington Lewis, age 49, from the United States. He's a member of the Church of England. His ethnicity is given an African, and then he says barber. And then his son, Albert Frederick, is right here, AFW, who's listed as being male. He's 10 years old. He's also listed as African. And we know a little bit about John Washington Lewis. We know that he was spent the remainder of his life in Cornwall, remaining as a barber up top. This is actually his death record when he passes away in December of 1880, listing him as being from Georgia, giving an incorrect age of 73 years, which we know is not correct. And we get a sense that he is accepted by the community. He's documented in early city directories, and while he's in Cornwall, he marries a local Irish woman who's an Irish immigrant by the name of Julia Ann Nyland. And they have, while they're in Canada, 5 children, of whom Albert is one of them. And so they're spending their time in this border community. They're an interracial couple. They're well integrated into the community and enjoy some success. Albert grows up in this community at the same time that the textile industry is really growing in Cornwall, and Albert, as a young man, becomes a textile loom mechanic, as listed in Canadian records. And Cornwall, as the town will tell you, is the place where lacrosse is professionalized and kind of forms. And we see that this is a Sanborn fire map of the community of Cornwall. You can see the St. Lawrence River right here. There's large textile and timber plants along the river, but then very prominently is the lacrosse grounds. So this is a community that really kind of is centered around lacrosse, and its history as a timber manufacturing space is going to actually shape lacrosse. It will become the center of lacrosse stick manufacturing in the early 20th century, which is also intertwined in the history of Albert. And so we know that Albert he's a young working class Afro-Canadian man. He's got a skill set that is in demand in the local community, but we also know that he is a very good athlete. He gets involved very, very early in the Cornwall Lacrosse Club. We also have documentation that he was on the cricket team in the Cornwall Lacrosse Club had a cricket team under their auspices, so it's kind of a weird thing to see in the paper, the Cornwall Lacrosse Club cricket team. Imagine like a football team having a baseball team. It kind of a little incongruous. And is very, very talented. Incredibly talented player, is very quickly seen as kind of one of the rising national stars on the lacrosse team. And you're going to see this picture a lot because this is the only photograph of Albert Frederick Lewis that I thus far have been able to track down. And here is Albert at the bottom of the photo, and the rest of his teammates on the Cornwall team. And as in the late 19th century, there's a growing debate about professional versus amateur sports and kind of the rise of organized sports as we consider it today. This is the time period in the United States where baseball gets formalized. You see the creation of the American League. You see kind of this growing attention to organized commercial sports. And lacrosse is going through similar things in Canada. And so you see the development of leagues. You see the development of kind of cross provincial competition. And so in 1888, we see that the Cornwall team is going to be competing against Ottawa, the national capital. They're going to be competing for the championship. And it is such a growing dominant political force, kind of, or cultural force in Canada by this time period. This is actually an advertisement for a sewing machine company that is telling everybody that they're going to shut down so that they can go to the match. We will close on Saturday, June 23rd, 2 o'clock to enable all hands to see the championship lacrosse match at the Metropolitan Grounds. And so early lacrosse is becoming very, very popular. The Cornwall team is very, very good. They're going to be competing against the team from the provincial capital, and very importantly for our story, they are the winners. They become the Canadian national champions in 1887, 1888, which again reproduces this single photo that I've been able to find of Albert. And he is recognized as being the dominant player on the team. That he has this kind of a natural athletic ability, that he has this command of the field, and that he is the exceptional lacrosse player in Canada. So much so that this debate in the late 19th century about distinctions between amateur and professional sports, this idea that if you were to pay somebody to play sports, that you're somehow sullying the game. This is a debate that happens very early in Major League Baseball. This is a debate that in the early NFL is also part and party of it. And this is also a debate that continued in the Olympics for quite some time. You know, as many of you will probably remember, there was a time when professional athletes were not competing at the Olympics, right? That it was an amateur's game. And now, when professional athletes can play, you know, it's a vastly different game. But this is subject to a lot of debate, and Albert gets brought into this debate in Canada is after the national championship, the community of Renfrew decides like, hey, we're gonna bring Albert in. He's gonna be our ringer. And they do. They pay him to come in, and they pay him, he asks for a job. He's like, okay, I'm gonna be giving up this job as textile loom mechanic. It's really lucrative in this mill town. If I'm gonna go over here, you need to have something comparable. And so he says, and he knows his worth, he says, you need to give me a job that'll pay $50 a week and then room and board. And they're able to negotiate it. The team is able to, the sponsors of the team are able to negotiate that and provide for him that service. But then when it was revealed that he is functionally being paid to play for an amateur lacrosse team, and thus kind of being the first professional lacrosse player in Canada, he is ejected from the National Lacrosse League in Canada. It is a massive scandal that takes up a lot of ink across the Canadian press. This is from the Ontario paper, where they are the kind of organizers of the league are debating, what do we do? Lewis has been paid, this is sullying the sport, we don't know what is gonna happen. And so, you know, the best lacrosse player in the nation is summarily banned. But then it is revealed that he only moved to Renfrew for a little bit, didn't actually take any of the money, didn't really play that much, and so they're able to kind of step back a little bit and they reinstate him back to his original team. And so he's put back on the Cornwall team, and only days later they lose the national championship. So very, very quickly we can see, again, he is seen as the dominant player. Cornwall wants him back. They want him. They want to kind of regain their glory. He's the point right here. But ultimately, he is defeated. And so this controversy kind of follows him. That, you know, he has sullied the sport a little bit. You know, and he makes his case and is able to defend himself and return to the sport. But he might see that there are possibilities elsewhere. And so we see then a shift in his arena, and he goes to Chicago. And he joins the Chicago Calumet Lacrosse Club. We see the expansion of the sport. We see the possibility and the potential that lacrosse might come into the United States. You might see some expansion. And so the Cornwall paper tells us that he is going to be going to Chicago, joining this athletic club's team. And not only that, but they're going to travel the world. They're going to play lacrosse in Great Britain. They're going to play lacrosse in Australia, Canada, you know, a lot of the the British Empire, essentially. Now, this is as we're going to see, part of the other underlying factor of this in the late 19th century is the United States doesn't have a second sport yet. Baseball is, by and large, the dominant sport in the United States in the late 19th century. Okay? We see the emergence of the American League and the creation of many of the teams, the Boston White Stockings, for example, that continue to be, you know, forces in professional baseball. But there's no second sport. And so we see a lot of contenders begin to emerge. For a little bit, it's long distance walking. For another part, it is cycling and kind of bicycle sports. There's an early move for lacrosse. And then there's this weird form of rugby that starts to emerge with a really large ball, no padding, and no forward pass. And that early form of rugby is eventually going to be what we now know as football. But there's this kind of emerging debate about what is going to be that second sport. And a lot of different contenders are in the mix, and lacrosse is very much that. But we don't actually know whether the Calumets went on this tour. It's very aspirational. There's not a lot of references to the Calumet Club in the Chicago press. So it's unclear whether Albert actually played for this team or did anything. Now, simultaneously to all of this, there's another community that is also having some very dynamic changes and kind of imagining itself kind of growing on the world stage, and that is Kearney. Okay. You've all probably assuredly seen, this photo of downtown Kearney. Alfred T. Anderson took this photo of the trolley line going down Central Avenue, the Opera House very prominently at left. But this is Kearney on the make, right, in the 1880s and the 1890s. And we actually have lacrosse in the 1880s before Albert Frederick Lewis even gets to town. The first lacrosse teams in Kearney actually date to 1889. We have a junior lacrosse league here in town, and many of the members of the team are notable names in early Kearney. The Boneson, who for a long time had a hardware store, Calkins, who will be later be an early city attorney, F.S. Hartzell, who he and his wife run the first bookstore here in town, and then you also see the Morris, Aspinwall, Moses, a lot of early folks in the community, very prominent names in early Kearney history. And they start this new sport, they import some lacrosse sticks from Canada, and then they challenge Lincoln, and Lincoln doesn't show up. So they win the state championship by default. So not exactly the most exciting kind of sporting history, and the team kind of flounders away after that. There's no references after 1889 to this original kind of iteration. What they really need is they need people who know lacrosse, who played lacrosse, and have skills if they want to be successful. So while they're reporting in Canada that Albert Frederick Lewis is in Chicago and traveling the world playing lacrosse, what we have evidence for here in Kearney is that actually he and his family moved here. He comes to Kearney in 1882, and it's not explicit in any of the materials why he comes to Kearney, but again, he has this very particular skill set as a textile loom mechanic. Why might a textile loom mechanic move to Kearney in the fall of 1892? That cotton mill opens in the fall of 1892. He has a really, really specific skill set, but I cannot definitively prove whether he went and worked at the cotton mill or not. These things just to align. We don't have any employment records for the cotton mill, we don't have a lot of other things, but we can reasonably assume this is probably what's bringing him to town, right? The other thing that brings him to town, as I will show you, is that he has two former teammates who are already established in Kearney. J.J. Patterson and his brother, who are both doctors, J.J. Cameron, are both doctors who operate out of the Opera House. They had been at one time opponents and occasional teammates in Canada, even facing off in national championship games. And so Albert has friends here. There's an economic pull possibly, but he also has people who know him and are probably writing to him like, hey, come to Kearney, we can do something. Yeah, you're in the United States, let's figure this out. And when he arrives, he brings his wife Mary Jane, who's also Irish, like his mother, and he has three children, Florence, Maud, and Clarence. And when he arrives in Kearney, there's a very small African-American community already, which I'll kind of point to here in a bit. And he also, as a practicing Episcopalian, he joins St. Luke's Church, which at this time period is known as the Church of Good Shepherd. And he's also arriving at this moment in Kearney in 1892, which this is a newspaper called the Kearney Gate, which was a particular marketing and branding slogan that was attached to Kearney, that we have the Kearney Gate, that we, and there's some, and occasionally you'll see images of figures who are able to have very long strides. That Kearney is very confident, that Kearney is on the rise, that Kearney is going to march into the future and, as the advertising in this time period will tell you, become the next Minneapolis. That is our aspiration. We're going to be the next Minneapolis. And as we can see, the Kearney Gate gave the city the cotton mill, the brick and Black Hills Railroad, the electric railroad, a free public library, water power, and the finest in the state, electric lights, both arc and incandescent, city water, sewage, free delivery, schools, among the best in the West, a magnificent opera house, an Episcopal college, which is the Kearney Military Academy, and other improvements generating over $2 million in the last 2 years. that we are really a city on the make. Okay, and I want you to remember this phrase, Kearney Gate, because it's going to pop up again. And so we think likely that Albert Frederick Lewis is working at the cotton mill, possibly. Again, we don't have employment records. We can't definitively tie him to this, but you're the only textile loom mechanic for hundreds of miles. This is probably where you're at. Because this is very complex machinery. This is a later photo from Indiana, from Evansville, but this is actually the plant that buys the mechanics from the Fort Kearney plant after it shuts down. So more likely than not that these are actually the looms and things that came out of the Kearney plant. This is a photo that was taken by Lewis Hine at the turn of the century, documenting child labor. Because these are, as you can tell, the women at the spindles are, in their early teens or younger. And this is very complicated machinery, okay, to operate. You've got, millions of threads that are, moving across very delicate machinery at very high speeds with no safety measures to produce all sorts of different types of cloth. So we know that there's an economic reason that he might be here. We know that this is probably what he is doing in his early years. He's repairing the machinery, he's working at the cotton mill, and making a decent paycheck. But he also knows that when he comes to Kearney, that he's not going to be the only person of color. We have a very small African-American community that has been in Kearney since the 1860s. The earliest documented African-Americans in what is now Buffalo County, Kearney County, central Nebraska are actually enslaved men, women, and children at Fort Kearney. There's about a dozen enslaved men, women, and children who appear on the 1860 census for Fort Kearney who were brought by Southern-born officers. And they functioned as domestics and servants and slaves at the fort during their time. We also have a small African-American community in Overton. So this map here at right, this is a map of African-American homesteaders in Overton. And you can just see right here at the bottom, here's Overton at the bottom. So this is the Buffalo County line, okay? And so you have about 12 families, African-American families who have immigrated from North Buxton, Ontario. Many of these families are interracial families that have married into white Canadian families, but it's families who, by and large, had escaped over generations on the Underground Railroad. And after the Civil War, made the decision to come back to the United States, take advantage of kind of available land and other opportunities, better climate. Doesn't necessarily seem like that today, but certainly better climate than Ontario. And come, and a great many of these families would then be the families who leave Overton in the early 20th century and move to DeWitt, Audacious, the better known black homesteading community up in Cherry County. So you have a small population of African-American farmers kind of on the edge of the county. You also have a small black community in Kearney itself, which we have a fairly fragmentary but illuminating record of when he is here. We also, when he moves to Kearney, we also have Bud and Della Fowler. Some of you might have been to my previous talk on Bud Fowler. Bud Fowler is the earliest documented black professional baseball player. He went into Cooperstown in 2020. He's ironically from Cooperstown, but played professional baseball in the late 19th century before the color line was imposed that then Jackie Robinson will break in the mid-20th century. And he is listed here. This is the city directory, 1892. There's Della and John Fowler, who goes by Bud, listed as baseball player. 212 West 30th Street, and then you'll see in the city directory for this time period, there is a C for colored, denoting that these men and women are black. And there's about a dozen African Americans in town in the 1890s. At the same time, and for those of you who have been to Dr. Stoudemire's talk, James and Eliza Galloway are also living here in town, working as a porter and a maid at the Midway Hotel. And Eliza is, from this time period, one of the better documented African American women in early Kearney. So they're arriving in a space that is overwhelmingly white, but that there are other African Americans who will welcome them and they can build community. And we know this too because we have other evidence for this. This is a an interview that was done by a Hastings man, Rodney Mullen, in 1982, actually the great uncle of one of our current students, where he talks about the early African-American community in central Nebraska, and talks about there being an African-American Methodist church in Hastings that is drawing residents from the surrounding areas, from Kearney, from Cozad, from Grand Island, and then as far away as Nicodemus, Kansas, which is the oldest black homesteading community west of the Mississippi River, and is now partially operated by the National Park Service as a National Historic Site. And it's about 2 hours south of Kearney. We also have some photographic evidence. We'll see this photo in full later of African Americans in Buffalo County as well. So Bud's so Albert has economic reasons to come. He's also going to find a community that there already are African Americans who will welcome him. And so when he arrives, very, very quickly, in the fall of 1892, they form a lacrosse team. The earliest evidence we have of Albert in town is actually lacrosse. Is the formation of their lacrosse club by J.J. Cameron, who is the captain of the one side, and then Albert is the captain of the other side. And these men have competed against each other, competed with one another for years. They know each other very, very well, and the press will repeatedly comment that these are the two best lacrosse players you've got in the area. And what they tell us is they're going to found this team in the fall of 1892, and very quickly that they want to compete against these other nascent lacrosse clubs, that they're going to have a Thanksgiving Day game against Omaha per the Kearney Hub. And they are going to look really spiffy when they do that, because we have a description of their uniforms. That they are in a maroon shirt with KLC across the front in black letters. They've got navy blue knickerbockers, right, so pants that just go to the knee, and then a heavy blue cap. And then lacrosse sticks, freshly imported from Canada. So they have uniforms, they have equipment, they are ready, just in a matter of weeks that they're going to take on Omaha. And this is going to be the sporting event in the state of Nebraska on November 1892. That being said, the Cornhuskers are also playing Iowa on that same day across town. So there is some competition. A couple hundred people come to the lacrosse match. A couple thousand people go to the football game. Okay, we're seeing which second sport is going to win. But we also know that at this game, James Boyd, who's the governor of Nebraska and former mayor of Omaha and former Gibbon rancher, actually goes to the lacrosse game to kind of open up the game between Omaha and Kearney. And so this is the first play. This is the first time that Kearney is going to be playing for the state championship. We have Cameron, we have Fowler, we have all of the athletic possibility that we need, and we win 4-0. We just smother Omaha. And the paper tells us a lot about, this is an era before radio, this is an era before television, so you have very detailed accounts of these athletic competitions. And the newspaper specifically tells us both Cameron is an ex-championship player and that Bud is of mixed race ancestry. These have played with leading professional teams. The way these two men handled that rubber ball with their aggravated tennis rackets was a revelation. But that man Lewis was always in the immediate vicinity of the spot where it landed, and he would pick it up and dodge like a Republican platform while running, like a Democrat, and watching his opportunity would fire it is Jay Cameron, as if with intent to kill. These are the most skilled lacrosse players on the Great Plains in the late 1900s, and they are dominant, okay, in 1892. And so then, come next year, the Kearney Lacrosse Club, in their beautiful maroon and blue outfits, once again are vying for the state championship, and we are going to play Lincoln. And again, they give minute-by-minute accounting of these games. At 4:24, Lewis got hold of the ball a little north of the goal, and by a simple twist of the wrist, tossed it gently to Roy Downing, who hurled it between the stakes as if shot out of a cannon, and the first point was made. A yell from the thousands of throats burst forth. The band struck up, "Oh, that's the Kearney Gate." I asked you to remember, that's the Kearney Gate. I don't know the lyrics for the song, but I'm sure it's really catchy. Or some other soul-inspiring selection, the water was passed and for 10 minutes the boys lay stretched out upon the green grass. So it's an exhausting game. They get pretty lengthy timeouts. In 10 minutes, Dr. Bullitt sent it whizzing between the stakes. Against the crowd went wild. The band struck up something that sounded like, "What's the matter with Kearney? She's all right." Again, another catchy song, I'm sure. And for 10 minutes, the red and the blue rested from their labors. So this is, again, we are the dominant force in this sport in the state. And the newspaper makes it very, very clear that Albert is part of this. As when we win, and again, defeat Lincoln 3-0 in this second championship, so we are back-to-back lacrosse champions in 1892, 1893, that the captain of the Lincoln team tells the Kearney Hub reporter, "You can tell your people that Lewis and Cameron are lacrosse players. We are glad to see them in Lincoln anytime. I doubt if there are any two better players in the state. Lewis is all right. He knows how lacrosse should be played and knows how to play it." Again, constant recognition for both of these men, but in particular Lewis as being the dominant force on the lacrosse field, on the lacrosse grounds in this time period. And amidst all of this, now he's a back-to-back champion. He is supporting a young family in Kearney, getting a lot of press. He also makes a very important decision, and that is to naturalize. And so this is the document here at the Trails and Rails Museum, Albert Frederick Lewis signing on the bottom. So on November 1st, so after the championship in 1893, he goes to the courthouse and says, "I would like to become a U.S. citizen." Immigration policy in this time period allows for this, that you can enter the country not being a citizen, you can have a job, you can live here, you can operate a business without being a citizen. And then, although this is a federal action, it is delegated to kind of local authorities. And so he goes to the courthouse, says, "I would like to become a citizen," and then after a certain amount of time, he will return to the courthouse, which he does in 1913, with affidavits from friends and family and stuff saying that he's a good American, he's a good citizen, he should become an official naturalized citizen. Now, it's interesting that he even does this, though. He doesn't legally have to. His father is a U.S. citizen. Under the 14th Amendment, he would be allowed to claim U.S. citizenship, as his father was born in the United States. But this is more likely than not a matter of legal confirmation of a very kind of dubious legal position, as his father had liberated himself on the Underground Railroad, would not have had any documentation of his U.S. citizenship. And so Albert might have felt that this was firmer confirmation, better legal kind of standing to become a U.S. citizen. And he continues to play lacrosse. I'm going to show you a couple other newspaper clippings from him, but he also kind of broadens out his athletic interests, and he is one of the founders of the first football team in Kearney in 1897, where he plays center. But also noting that he has qualities of a lacrosse player that will serve him well in football. So he is a multi-sport phenomenon, as is evidenced in all of the local press. And we see, again, Omaha in 1895 wants to create a lacrosse team and reaches out to him to coach. The Coach Lewis of the Kearney team will be the best option that they have. And then purportedly, and it's unclear, I've not found any other evidence besides kind of local evidence, that the lacrosse players in Kearney, specifically Jay Cameron and Albert Frederick Lewis, are asked to play on the national team at the World's Fair in Buffalo. This is the Pan American Exhibition, where most famously President William McKinley will be assassinated. So we see international recognition for their skill, that they are kind of seen as dominant players. But he's more than a lacrosse player. It's unclear after the cotton mill closes down, if he worked for the cotton mill, although we have some suspicion. What he ends up doing is he operates a laundry out of his home with his family from about the mid-1890s through the 1910s. They lived at 22 East 30th Street, so kind of over by Good Samaritan Hospital. And as far as I've been able to tell, the home that stands on that property today is the original home that Albert and his family lived in. And this is the fire insurance map, the Sandbar fire insurance map. They're right there on the corner. And in Kearney, he and his wife have a few more children. They had originally come from Canada with Florence. with Raina and with Clarence, and then they have a son and a daughter, Archie and Harriet, here in Kearney. We know that Maud Lewis worked as a nurse. We have her nurse's license at the Buffalo County Historical Society. Of all of the children, she's the only one I've not been able to definitively kind of track down. She kind of disappears from the historical record. There's a lot of evidence that the kids very quickly moved out of Kearney relatively soon after their father dies, as I'll talk about. But even in his old age, that he is still very much a lacrosse player. And so in 1904, his former teammate, James J. Lawley, comes to Kearney to visit him. And this is recorded in the Kearney Hub. The lacrosse is spelled wrong. It took me a long time to find this. But the J. Lawley stops here to visit an old friend from Cornwall to talk to Albert Frederick Lewis. And James Lawley isn't just any old friend. This is James. James runs the Lawley lacrosse stick manufacturing. He is the lacrosse magnate of Canada. He operates a factory in Cornwall that employs both Canadians and Indigenous workers who are well versed in the creation of lacrosse sticks. This is actually the plant here on the fire map, and then this is the lithography stone for their letterhead, where you can see the kind of different, and they also make cricket bats and then field hockey sticks. Or no, that's actually just a hockey stick, not a field hockey stick. That is an ice hockey stick. And so they are still in communication. He very much is still talking to people in Cornwall, so much so that in 1906, when the city has a celebration, he and his daughter go to Cornwall, and he tells us that he's really excited to get back on the lacrosse pitch. I don't expect to be in the pink of condition, weird phrase, for the old timers lacrosse match, but if the reference is not too strict, I hope to make some of the fellow traveler their best pace have a stick for me. And we know he goes to Cornwall. He's in the local paper. He is victorious on the lacrosse pitch in 1906, even though it's been a while since he's been in state and national championship kind of shape. And this is where this photo that is reproduced comes from. This is a picture from the 1906 Cornwall Reunion booklet, which the University of Nebraska Kearney Special Collections, we actually have now acquired a copy. We're the only library in North America with a copy now, and has Albert listed as being a resident of Kearney. And he has a family that is involved in the community, that is also denoting their athletic abilities. This is the 1912 Kearney High football team, and this gentleman here in the middle, this is Archie. This is Albert's youngest son, and he is the right end for the Kearney High football team. And just also of historical interest, this is Ilhan Nu. Dr. Ilhan Nu will later be one of the founding fathers of South Korea. But more famously in the United States, he's the co-founder of La Choy Foods, which you assuredly have seen in the grocery store at some point in time. He creates that, co-founds it with a college classmate at the University of Michigan. But then will go found Yuhan Company, which is one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in South Korea. But it's very, very involved in the Korean independence movement. And so, again, all sorts of kind of overlooked or hidden histories sitting here in Kearney. In 1915, Albert passes away. He passes away actually in New York City, and notices of his death appear in all the local papers as well as the papers in Cornwall. He's there on a business trip. He's getting new equipment for the laundry. There's growing competition that is happening in the laundry business. They run a hand laundry, so they're doing everything by hand. There's already a steam laundry in Kearney, which can return things a lot quicker, but a hand laundry is better for your delicates and other kinds of things that you might want. It's also cheaper than steam laundry. So in all likelihood, he was wanting to expand his business and increase kind of the possibility for increased volume and other kinds of things. We're going to see after this, just a couple of years later, Liberty Cleaners is going to be founded here in Kearney as well. So again, kind of growing demand for laundry. He is returned here to Kearney shortly after his death and has a funeral at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. At this time period, now St. Luke's Episcopal Church is no longer the Church of the Good Shepherd. We have notices in the paper that the family wants to thank the community for all the outpouring of support that has been provided. They understand, you know, that they have had to close shop, that there's been some changes, but that they're going to do their best to continue the family business after the passing of Albert. And then there's another notice in the paper just thanking the community for the outpouring of support. And so what this really tells us is that this was a family that really was beloved in the community. People really did care for the Lewises, that they were, you know, Albert was a known force in the community. There's other things that he's involved in that are not the subject of this talk. But there are also challenges for the Lewis family. Albert himself has a white Irish mother, a black father, is a biracial individual, marries a white woman. So all of the children have some black ancestry, and that shades a lot of their experiences here. That throughout the documentary record shows us that they are navigating the color line, the changing kind of racial attitudes, legal restrictions, and other things throughout. In 1891, the Canadian census doesn't actually tell us their racial identity when they're still in Canada. In 1900, Albert is listed as Canadian, or his father is listed as Canadian, his mother is Irish. All the children are listed as black. Under U.S. policy, under U.S. law at the time, what is known as the one-drop rule, no matter how limited black ancestry you have, you are legally black. So the children whose father is biracial, that they themselves only have one black grandparent, are nonetheless, under U.S. law, black. In the 1910 census, Albert's father is listed as Virginian, his mother is Irish. He's as black, and the children are listed as mixed. And then Mary Jane Lewis, who is his wife, is typically French-Canadian, although sometimes she's English-Canadian, depending on the census taker. So that also varies. And so we kind of get a sense of why Albert and his children are, again, navigating these dilemmas. We know that they're accepted in the community, we know that they're welcomed, but that could not have been universal, knowing what we know about central Nebraska in this time period. After 4 years after Albert passes away, as many of you will know, William Brown was lynched in Omaha during the riot in 1919. But what you probably don't know is that there was another riot in Lexington that same year, where an African-American burglar entered a home, was arrested, and a mob formed in downtown Lexington and expelled all the African-American men from the city. There was a group of African-American men who were actually out grading the highway. And the mob came to the campsite for the road crew, started firing into the campsite for the road crew, and forced them all to flee. And this is really well documented in the local press at the time. Meanwhile, here in Kearney, in just a couple of years, you're going to see the rise of the Second Ku Klux Klan, which is going to be very, very popular in Kearney. They host cross burnings at the county fairgrounds. This is from 1925, where they talk about the delegations from other claverns, that they march up Central Avenue, that there were nearly 300 marchers, and then go and have a cross burning at the county fairgrounds. This is a photo from 1923 of hooded Klansmen on Central Avenue. These men are actually participating in the 50th anniversary of Kearney Parade. And this photograph comes from a Klan magazine, the Imperial Nighthawk. So we see growing racial tensions in the community, particularly after the First World War. And you know, the challenges that the Lewis family has in navigating this color line. We see then that Archie, the star right end of the Kearney High football team, who when he lives in Kearney is legally identified as African American, that in the 1940s, when he registers for the military, for the draft during the First World War, he enumerates himself as white. He says he's born in Kearney, but in 1894, but is now, with the death of his father, is able to completely pass under the restrictions of the era. And all of the Lewis kids leave. The family leaves, and so actually it just leaves Mary. It just leaves Albert's widow here in Kearney. And so when she passes away in 1944, she does spend some time traveling, and she's kind of in the paper a little bit after Albert passes away, but not much. But by the time she passes away in 1944, that is the extent of her obituary. And it's just a notice of a funeral at St. Luke's. Nothing about her famous husband, nothing about lacrosse exploits, nothing about her life. Just that she's gonna have a service and a burial. And so this story is over the couple of decades after the passing of Albert, it is forgotten and it fades, even though there are people in the community who could assuredly tell you about Albert's exploits on the lacrosse field within the lifetime of folks who are still alive today. And so Albert, here's Albert, and then their daughter Florence, who does pass away, is a 15-year-old here in Kearney. The whole family is in the southeast corner of the Kearney Cemetery. They're really close to the fence line, right there on the east side of the cemetery. My hope is that someday, with some convincing, I could get a historical marker for their gravesite in the cemetery, but it is they're kind of off by themselves in the southeast corner of the cemetery. But this is a history that was really well known at the time, and then faded as kind of time went by. And that is largely due to changing racial attitudes in the community. And we know this because one of their, assuredly someone who's known to them, if they were friends or at the very least acquaintances, tells us that. Eliza Galloway, who some of you have been to Dr. Stoudemire's talk, and I introduced her at the beginning, talks about this in an interview that she does with the Kearney High Echo in 1928, that she's lived here for 42 years, she's traveled all around, but the amount of African American families in town has decreased. There were once 8, and now there's only 1, and they're planning on leaving, but I guess I'll stay here until they haul me out, which is what Eliza ends up doing. She dies here in Kearney during the Great Depression. This is a photo of her outside her home over on 28th Street. The home is still there. This is a photo that I actually was able to track down. This is of all places, this photo is in Seoul, Korea, in the National Archive in Seoul, Korea, in the papers of another Korean independence activist who knew Eliza when he lived here in town and had this in his collection. So there is a really rich and overlooked history of African Americans in central Nebraska and in Kearney. Some of you are assuredly familiar with this photo of black homesteaders in Westerville, which is north of Kearney on the way up to Broken Bow in Custer County. We have photos of African American laborers in Buffalo County. This is from the Trails and Rails Museum. We also have photos of African American youth. This is at the State Industrial School, what's now YRTC. This is the track team. You can get a sense of athletic equipment in this era. It's not as high tech as it certainly is today. And their baseball team. And so we have integrated baseball in Kearney since the very beginning, both Bud Fowler and then at the State Industrial School. And so there is a really rich history of African American life, and Albert Frederick Lewis is an exceptional case in this, but was in his time here, was a national champion, was a national lacrosse legend, and a story that Kearney very, very quickly forgot after his passing, but is one that very thankfully the people of Cornwall, Ontario still tell this story, and were able to inform us and let us know so that we could connect what we have here with the story that they are telling there. So with that, thank you, and anybody got any questions? Yeah, you in the back.
So, Louisville, Kentucky is, everybody knows that's the home of the Louisville Slugger,
Mhm.
where all the baseball bats are made.
Yeah.
Is Cornwall known as the mecca of the lacrosse stick, or is that
Yeah,
not
so
a similar association?
it's still like a lolly stick. They don't make them anymore, the factory is gone, but a lolly stick today will still set you back quite a bit. Not that I've looked, But we'll set you back quite a bit. And there's a kind of division within contemporary lacrosse. I've had to learn a lot about contemporary lacrosse. Most sticks now are synthetic. They're kind of more flexible plastics. But there is a certain kind of contingent within the sport that still prefers a wooden stick and still prefers increasingly indigenous made. First Nations artisans are the ones who make the best sticks. And so the St. Regis Reserve, right just off Cornwall, has been making lacrosse sticks for just about forever. And so still is producing lacrosse sticks. And it's a very traditional art form in how you make it and required the right kind of wood, everything that's involved in making it. So yeah, for part of the early 20th century, this would be comparable to the Louisville Slugger for Canadians. So again, it's just a passing reference in the Kearney Hub, but then in the Cornwall paper, Jay Lally's kind of trip across the United States gets a lot of ink. So you can kind of see the distinction. We were just like, oh cool, a guy came and visited his friend. And then in Canada, it's like, oh no, like local business magnate, lacrosse stick manufacturer travels around the United States, meeting with people. So that's a good comparison would be the Louisville Slugger.
On the naturalization,
Mm-hmm.
it appears that it was 20 years from the time he applied until he was naturalized. Is that typical of that era?
Yeah, it depends on when, because there was no, the process was a lot more fluid and less restrictive than it is today. So it took 20 years, I think, and Linda, you can correct me, I think you could do it within like 5 to 7 years, fairly quickly. So he just didn't get around to it.
Oh, okay.
But he was able to travel internationally, right? He goes to Canada in 1906. He's not a U.S. citizen. He doesn't have a U.S. passport, and yet he's able to cross over the border with no problem. He doesn't have a Canadian passport, as far as I can tell either.
I have 2 questions.
Mhm.
So, was there anything in particular that inspired Cornwall to get in touch with you guys?
No, and Carol, since you know both Brock and I don't think we actually even responded to their email before we started getting in on the research.
Shocking.
Yeah, shocking. Imagine that. So I don't actually think we replied to them before. I think that they were doing some local celebrations and some stuff they've been trying to piece together, because he is also, and I guess I probably didn't mention this, he is the first documented black lacrosse player ever. So he is comparable to like a Jackie Robinson, kind of in the Canadian national sport. Early player, early black players. So they've been kind of trying to piece together this story, I think, is one of the things. They have stuff on him, they have records, they have other kinds of stuff. So I think they've been really interested in kind of particularly telling his story, is why they reached out to us, thinking that we would have something, which we ended up having.
And now you've sent it to them? You're going to?
We're going to. We're going to. Brock and I, we'll get to it. We'll send him a link to the video
right there.
with an apology. It's deep in Lena's mailbox now, so I don't know where,
And the other question was, his wife, where was she buried? She wasn't right next to her
Oh,
husband
they're all
and
there.
daughter?
They're all there. The whole, there's 4 graves,
Okay, they're all together.
for he and his wife, and then they have 2 children who pass away here. And so they're in a little cluster there on the southeast corner of the cemetery. Again, kind of, it's actually just a little bit south from the section that's children. So it's on the periphery of the cemetery.
Could you just clarify lacrosse? You said indigenous, is it indigenous American and then picked up by Europeans? Or, where did it start? I mean, lacrosse is a French word.
Yeah, no, it's an indigenous, various, in Canada, First Nations and then indigenous peoples in what is now the United States all played some variation of kind of a stick and ball game. And so there's different kinds of, and First Nations elders and others will tell you that it has a lot of cultural and spiritual connections, and so it was something that was gifted to them, in kind of religious terms, and is then kind of adapted and modified by Europeans. And there's different cases where there's a case, a fairly famous case where there's a group of First Nations players who play outside a British fort in Michigan and play a game for the people at the fort, and then use that as a distraction and then go and attack the British fort. So there's a lot of, it's a game that very quickly Europeans are kind of interested in. There's records of lacrosse in the Jesuit Relations, which are 17th century French Jesuit records of Ontario and Quebec, where they write about it. And so Europeans kind of pick it up through their process of colonization and then modify it along the way.
Why do you think it didn't take off here?
It's probably a little too similar to baseball. You know, there's not enough of a distinction, whereas you know, the differences between football and baseball are pretty clear. And it just wasn't, I think, as exciting. You know, and it did take off. This is the map from the history of lacrosse, and all of the communities where you see where it is popular, it still is popular. And lacrosse got really big at Ivy League institutions and then kind of private boys schools, where it still really is dominant on the East Coast in the United States. So the Naval Academy, Baltimore, you know, New York, Newport, Boston, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. So these are places where it is still played. It is still, there's a National Lacrosse League. You know, they play internationally. It just, for whatever reason, did not kind of extend that much further west. And even if you were to look at a map of contemporary lacrosse today, there's only a handful of schools on the Great Plains that even have, and it's usually like D2, D3 schools that kind of want to have a specialist sport that might draw students. I think Midland College and then Creighton, I think, are the only two college teams, and it's club teams.
Do they still wear knickerbockers?
They do not, no. It looks a lot more like, you wear a helmet kind of like a catcher's helmet in baseball. And then you have some padding and then like shorts. Yeah, and then like soccer cleats. And then plastic or wooden stick. Don't ask me to explain the rules. I've not gotten that deep into this research just quite yet. Any other questions?